I thank my friend, I thank the gentleman. Mr. Grimm, what exact climate change model are you going to use?
I think the best answer for that is we're still looking at available data for that model, and particularly looking at the Mapping Advisory Council recommendations and what they would recommend to FEMA.
Yeah, I could point you to Oregon State University, where we have a couple of world-renowned climate change scientists who say that actually there are incredibly contradictory models, which are both scientifically credible for Oregon, where we may have more or less flooding. We may have way less rain and precipitation, i.e., you know, we may actually maybe have a smaller 100-year flood. That's one model. The other model is, whoa, no, it's going to be a huge expansion. So how the heck are you going to figure that out?
That's something we're still working out, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's going to take some interesting work. So does that have anything to do with you sent a letter which caused a tremendous amount of concern that they, you know, on June 13th, that communities could either voluntarily impose a temporary moratorium on all floodplain development that adversely impacts ESA listed species. That would be like repaving Highway 101, for instance, or voluntarily implement interim measures found in the RPA until all permanent RPA elements are in place. Now, I understand that this was supposed to kick in on the 13th of September, and it hasn't. What's the delay? How long are you going to delay imposing this new restriction?
So the RPA 1 required outreach and education. That letter was part of meeting the requirements from fisheries in implementation of RPA number 1. Interesting part about these RPAs are their two sets of RPAs, the interim measures, as you point out, and the long-term measures that, you know, go out to 2021. We have some options, as you point out, in terms of a community could adopt that type of prohibition. FEMA has no intent to go and suspend or implement compliance until we get our guidance out. Our intent is to work with the states, communities.
But what's the new deadline? I mean, you had a deadline before. Is there a new deadline? Have you set it?
No, we have not set a new deadline.
Okay, and when do we anticipate we might know what the new deadline is?
I can get back to you on that, sir.
Okay. All right. And then there is, of course, an exception. Where implementation of the mitigation standards set forth above is impracticable, a community may propose alternative mitigation standards. Sounds good. Which will be acceptable if both FEMA and National Marine Fisheries agree the alternative standards provide the resource protection equivalent to that provided by the measures above. You have experts in your agency that can make these sorts of determinations on that?
No, we don't have biologists on staff per se. We can contract out, for example, to get those services. That's my understanding of that particular alternative, and that's one that I had involvement negotiating. That's the type of flexibility that we wanted to get in there. My understanding, though, is that
it's not much flexibility if you include nymphs, giving them veto power.
Yes, sir.
You know, I find this all very extraordinary. We have two federal agencies that consult with one another. It seems like one that can bully or overrule you and require you to do things that are beyond your legal authority, or at least propose them, and no public involvement. I mean, I'm really familiar with the National Environmental Policy Act. I mean, why, you know, seems to me it's like way outside of what NEPA usually requires by federal actions. This is a federal action. Why doesn't NEPA apply, which requires a public process before you propose something? Why doesn't that apply in this case?
I can't speak on behalf of Marine Fisheries in terms of the process with development of the RPAs.
Yeah.
You know, as I stated, the process that was used was very unique. That FEMA got, I believe, extra time to try to negotiate and work through these RPAs to make them more flexible. And from a FEMA perspective as well, when, for example, we work with communities to either develop ordinances or new mapping products even, we do hold series of community meetings in the mapping process, for example, to get data, to talk through.
Right.
where
I
there's
know,
a
you know,
risk.
I was involved with that in the county
Yeah.
commission meeting. Just one more quick point, Mr. Chairman. So now that NIMS, and my understanding is they say, well, we don't like what we did in Washington State because, A, they don't have comprehensive land use planning, unlike Oregon, so they have much more sprawl and that. But we gave them flexibility, but it's not working sufficiently. But now we're going to have a new prescriptive approach in Oregon, which we hope to apply nationwide to every state in the union, no matter how different or diverse they are, or what species. How do we get Washington State to move? You know, I mean, what are our options up there? It seems if what they're doing is insufficient, is their RPA, you know, permanent with all this flexibility, or is there a way to challenge that and say, gee, I think now Washington State needs to fall under the new prescriptions in Oregon?
Two parts to that. FEMA believes from a FEMA perspective that the Washington State RPA is working, and we appreciate the flexibility in that implementation so we can work with communities. If we do change our regulatory requirements, that would apply nationwide. And I imagine I'm kind of speculating here, it could impact the way Washington implements the current.
So existing RPAs could be impacted because of the regulatory changes that are going to be necessary to implement the dictates of NIMS for Oregon.
I believe that is a possibility, sir.
Well, I hope my colleagues from the other 49 states are listening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.